Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play, where I'm going to try my very best to do a spoiler-free rules and setup for Discover Lands Unknown. Now, if you're familiar with what this product is, then you can scrub ahead a bit, and maybe I'll put a time code up on the screen. But if you are unfamiliar with what this product is, it is a survival game in which you are heading off into lands unknown and trying to survive. Discover Lands Unknown is a cooperative game for the most part, but it's also a little competitive. You don't have to all survive together, and you can win if the other players are eliminated. If the other players are eliminated early on, they just don't come back. They're done playing the game for the evening. But you can all win together, and it is easier to win together. Mostly. The game is for 1 to 4 players, and probably takes about 2 hours to play. It's produced by FFG, and it's produced using an algorithm that intelligently randomizes the contents of each box. So what you get is a coherent play experience with a coherent story that is completely different to the contents of every other Discover Lands Unknown game. So what that means for me is that there's only a certain amount I can teach you, and the rest will be open to you to discover on your own. For example, there are at least 4 biomes, but I'm not sure how many there are in total. They are depicted on the box here: the mountain, tropical island, badlands, and jungle. Now, I'm going to use components from the tropical island in this video. If you don't want to see them at all, then turn away now. But if you're okay with seeing them, then I'm not going to spoil anything too significant. The game does have a story, but I won't tell you any more than that. Furthermore, the story could be different in every box, so the spoilers for my game may well not be spoilers for your game. However, a story is great and everything, but what's also important is how do the mechanics work. Because around all of this exciting randomization, out of this prospect of discovering a land unknown, you're going to have a set of mechanics that function as the backbone for all copies of the game. And that's what I'm going to teach you today. What I will do very quickly is show you the pieces you'll need as a player, and I'll show you the pieces you'll need to set out during setup as well. However, you will have to check the setup in the box because it will be particular to your copy of the game. After I've run you through those pieces and that setup, I'll just explain quickly how you explore the island and survive there. I'll tell you about the threats that you might encounter there, and this will actually be relatively short because I can't really go into much more detail than that. What I can do is show you some of the iconography and explain how some of the cards work. Again, I'll try to avoid spoilers as much as possible, so depending on your definition of a spoiler, you may want to turn away. But if you're okay with discovering that, for example, there are snakes on the island, and again, you might not have snakes, then stick with us because the spoilers are going to be that minimal. So I don't know if your copy of Discover will be similar to mine, but mine contains 5 scenarios that form an overarching story. These 5 scenarios take you through the undiscovered land and take you through the 2 biomes that are contained in the game. The first scenario in my box takes place on the tropical island, which is why I'll be using those pieces during this video. It's important to understand that the game is set up in a series of scenarios. You'll have a number of objectives, and when you've completed those objectives, you will have completed the scenario. When you've completed all 5 scenarios, you will have completed the story part of your copy of Discover. You may not have seen everything that's in the box, but you will have completed a story from the beginning right up until the end. So in order to begin, you will need the reference sheet that pertains to the biome that is the setting for your scenario 1. Now this could be different in every box, I cannot say for sure, but in my box this is the tropical island and it's the setting for my scenario 1, so it will tell me here everything I need to do to set up the game. So you'll reference this for your setup, and that's about all I can really tell you, but it's pretty straightforward and it's very easy to follow this information. There's also a reference sheet on the back. Each player will need a set like this. The set contains a meeple, a reference card with all the actions available in the game, and 3 support cards. Now you don't need these if you're playing solo, only if you're playing with more than 1 player. You'll also want to set your health dials to healthy, and your stamina to 10 if you're playing with 2 players, 12 if you're playing on your own, and 8 if you're playing with 3 or 4 players. Each player also starts with a food token and a clean water token. Note that these are distinct from meat and dirty water. and a number of these blue project cards. These blue project cards are things that can be crafted in the game. They are blueprints, and once a player has discovered the blueprints by crafting the item, then everybody can craft that item. In a 1-player game you start with 3, in a 2-player game you have 2 each, and in a 3 or 4-player game you have just 1 each. And you'll need to craft these in order to draw more cards from the deck and craft more cool things. These are pretty essential to your survival, so you'll want to be crafting them. 2 for blue player in a 2-player game. You're going to need these. These are your scenario cards, and these are going to tell you the plot of the game and what happens. In the first scenario there are 3 stages, so we'll make a deck made up of stage 1, 2, and 3. And when we want to start playing, we'll turn over the top card, and that will tell us what's going to happen and how we start the game and what our objective is. When we progress through to card 3 and finish the instructions on card 3, we will have won the game, or those of us who are left alive will have won. Everyone will also need a character card. Here you've got a deck of characters, and everybody gets 2 character cards, picks one to keep, and gets rid of the others. The characters are only distinct by their name, occupation, and the only in-game effect they have is this unique ability here. Each character has one unique ability. So we have here night cards. The game takes place in 2 phases. The day phase, in which characters will wander around the island taking actions and doing things, and the night phase wherein bad things will happen, and those bad things are listed on these cards. Now, if you're not in a good way at night, that means you're not safe by a fire or in a camp, then you may also have to draw these threat cards, which have additional bad things on them. Now, these red night cards are far worse than the blue night cards. The game will instruct you to shuffle the blue night cards and the red cards and form a single deck. Every night you'll draw a card from this deck and follow the instructions on it, and they're all bad. You may be instructed to use the blue threat cards, which are milder, or the orange threat cards, which are harder when you get to later scenarios. The game will then instruct us to set up our board. Each biome has a starting tile like this, which is double-sided and has our camp on it. This is the first tile you put down. Put your camp on here, and the reason there's a little camp token here is because the fire can go out. So there we have a version with the fire out as well. But you start with the fire lit. Then we have our land tiles here, and these are numbered 1 through 4. And these are going to be set out in a specific way that's going to create the land for us to explore. Now note that these are set up the same way in each scenario for the biome. So you'll probably only have 2 setups for all 5 scenarios. But because they're randomized, the layout of the area will be different every time, and you may have different setups to me based on what's in your box. So now I've set up my island as per the instructions. I can throw down a little direction token here, and what we've got here is a little compass facing north 1 to 2. And this will be used when we roll a d12 to determine the movement of enemies. You will also be instructed to set out this exploration deck. This is a number of numbered cards, and there may be duplicates of numbers as you go through this deck. You will find that they're in sequential order. You'll be instructed to set it up in sequential order. Now you will be instructed which range of numbers to include from your set in here. So it may well say 1 through 60, and then it'll tell you to go through and remove certain cards as well during setup, but you are also instructed not to look at any of them. So these are going to remain hidden until you discover them somehow in the game and are told to flip the card over and read it. We've got these monsters, and they work much the same way. You'll be instructed which range of numbers to include and whether there's any you need to remove. And then they just form a deck, and you'll get these out whenever the number comes up. And you're told to draw the enemy with that number. Next, we've got this equipment deck. These are all craftable pieces of equipment. Players can never have more than 1 item with the same name, but each player can have up to 1 copy, so you've got 4 copies of each card. Now, these items are crafted by making the blueprints, and then you get a copy of the item, and everybody else can craft a copy of the item from those blueprints. Once they're made, they'll go face up next to the board. You might also have these special red blueprints, but these are only going to be pulled out when referenced specifically by the game, so you don't need to worry about them until the game tells you to. This is the tribal leader token. This denotes who is the first player. The player with the tribal leader token will be referenced by the game, so it's important to use this and make sure you know who has it. We've also got these resource tokens. These represent the different resources you'll find on the island. There's a whole lot of different resources you might find on the island, including stones, logs, medicine, pelts, poison, machine parts, meat and food, clean water, and dirty water. You may have noticed that the meat and food token is double-sided, one of the only ones that is, and that's because when you cook meat, it becomes food. Note that you cannot eat raw meat. You must cook it first. We also have these terrain tokens, and these are going to come out on the board and can be gathered. Terrain tokens also double as resources and have a random number of resources on the back. When you pick these up, you just hang on to these tokens to represent that you have that resource. You've got some wood tokens, you've got some fishing tokens, you've got some stone tokens, we've got some wildlife tokens here. We've also got these monster tokens. Monsters, wildlife, adversaries. These are things that you probably don't want to face in the game because they're dangerous. But they'll be coming out and they'll be wandering around, prowling around, so you're going to have to deal with them. We've also got these clean water source tokens, and you can put these out when you find a source of clean water. We've got some wound tokens. If you do a wound to a creature or adversary that has more than one wound, you can use these to denote them. You can also use them for other things like ammunition or various other purposes. You might find you have some special enemy tokens. These are representative of plot-specific enemies, things like that, and you'll only need this token when you are specifically told to reference it. We've got some fireplace tokens, and you can see that these have a lit and unlit side. And we got a gray and red D12. Note that these are used for combat. Note that none of these components are supposed to be component limited. So if you've run out of tokens of a specific type, for example, fires, you've made too many fires all over the island, you've got no more fire tokens, you can just use something representative. And then you decide who's going to be the tribal leader to start. You each roll a die, and the person with the highest result gets to be the tribal leader. You can reroll ties, and then you're ready to start adventuring on the island. The meeples go down here at the campsite, and you flip over the first scenario stage 1 card and start reading the text, and that will tell you what the story is and what you're going to do. Now I'm going to run through the basic actions of the game and explain to you just how those work. I may at this point have to reference some cards to teach you about how some of the cards work, but it will be fairly spoiler free. Again, there will be nothing here that spoils the story or your exploration of the game. It's just going to be basic rules stuff. But if you are sensitive to spoilers, then now might be the time to switch off after you've seen the component stuff. But if you're still with us, then let's have a look at how this game works. At its core, it's a resource management game. Each turn you'll have a number of stamina to spend doing things, and you need to do things efficiently enough in order to stay alive and progress your story. When you reach the end of the story, you'll win the game. Stamina is spent during the day phase as you wander around the island doing things, and then gained again during the night phase, where you'll be resting, and you'll draw a night card which has a bunch of automated stuff on it. So you'll go through the night card in order, which will involve things like needing to eat, drink, moving enemies around, spawning new enemies, and checking to see whether you are alone in the dark. You see, if you're alone without a campfire, chances are you're going to take one of these threat cards, which is going to have more bad stuff on it. But if you've managed to rest at a campfire or with your friends, then you're more protected and less likely to need a threat. Note that at some point during the game, these night cards will escalate to the red ones, and things will get a lot harder. The actions you can take in the game are move, which involves moving around these little hexes on the board. Gather, which involves picking up these terrain tiles from the board. When you pick up a terrain tile, you'll flip it and something will happen. Either you'll gain resources, or maybe you'll go into the exploration deck or the enemy deck. You can move and gather, which is a combined action, so it's cheaper to do. Moving costs a stamina depending on the terrain type you're moving into. The terrains are all here on your reference sheet, and you'll be told how much it costs to move into a terrain tile by the prices here. So as you can see, you can move through the beach and the grass for just 1 stamina, but if you want to enter an underbrush, ocean, or mountain, it's more expensive. Gather action is always only 1 stamina, and a move and gather action is the price of the movement into the tile, but allows you to take a free gather action once there. So it's more efficient. Movement is the only action that costs more than 1 stamina. Everything else costs just 1 stamina. The other actions are Scout, which involves flipping over one of these tiles. When you flip over a tile, you're going to put tokens out on it. You can Investigate, which means you've seen something interesting on the tile and you want to look in more detail. Usually this means finding a card here, an exploration card, that matches the number of the item you're investigating. You can Craft, which means you're making one of these blueprints. All of the blueprints have a resource cost, so in order to craft, you must pay the resources, be this wood, stone, meat, pelts, whatever. You will have a number of these resources that you must pay, and when you craft it, you go into the item deck and take a copy of the item and turn the newly crafted blueprint face up next to the board, and now all players can make that thing. After that, you draw a new project card, so you always have the same number of project cards based on the number of players. You can take a trade action for 1 stamina, and this means that you can trade any number of your items with any survivor in the same space as you. So you must be in the same space, and then you pay 1 stamina. You can trade items, you can trade resources, you can trade anything. For 1 stamina, you can cook meat. In order to cook meat, you must be at a fireplace. And if you have any meat which you acquire from hunting and gathering, then at the fireplace you can spend 1 stamina to cook it. Note that when you cook meat, you can cook any number of meat icons into food for just 1 stamina. Now, at the beginning of the game, there's only 1 fire on the board, and that's the campsite. But later, these other fires will come out. However, they can also go out. If it rains, for example, or if you don't tend the fire, it can go out. So you can take an action to restart the fire. That's 1 stamina. You must discard 1 wood resource, and then you can restart the fire, turning it back to its lit side. You can also recover. Each of our characters here has 4 hit points. When you lose a hit point, you turn this dial to the type of damage you've taken. If all 3 dials are pointing away from the hearts and you take another damage, you're dead and eliminated from the game. If you go thirsty, you turn the dial here to the thirst icon. If you have no food, you go here to the starvation icon. If you take disease, illness, or poison, it's up here to the disease, illness, or poison icon. And if you take physical damage, you go here to the physical damage. You can take a recover action for 1 stamina, which means consuming medicine to heal damage taken due to illness, disease, or poison. You can heal starvation damage by eating food. You can heal thirst by drinking water. You can never heal physical damage unless a card specifically says you can. So unless you find a special item, any physical damage you take, you will wear until you win or lose. If you are ever eliminated from the game, take all of your resources and items, put them in the space where you are. Other players can enter that space and loot them for 1 stamina, and then they can take 1 thing from your body. Now this might all sound jaunty, and it's nice, wandering around the island, picking up resources and crafting things and finding items, and that's all very well and good. But you do have a maximum carry limit, which is 10 items. You cannot go over 10 items. If you would, then you must drop something. You cannot ever drop quest items because who knows when they're going to be important. However, sometimes you can craft things that will help you carry more items. But remember, you can only ever have 1 crafted item with the same name at any given time. So once you've completely exhausted all of your stamina and you're down to 0, then your turn is done. Play will pass to the player to the left of the tribal leader. Once you've gone all the way around the table like that, you will then resolve a knight card, and then you will vote on who becomes the new tribal leader, and play will begin again. This will continue until you've completed the objective on your scenario card and been through all of the scenario cards, at which time the game ends, or until every player is eliminated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a sample turn. Up until this point, I've pretty much avoided spoilers as best I can, but now I'm going to show you some of these cards. So if you don't want to see the cards, look away. If it's our orange player's turn, they have 10 stamina to spend. They might begin by walking along the coastline. 1, 2, that's 2 stamina. They're down to 8. They can spend another stamina to explore this tile here, which will flip it face up. Now we can see that there is a fish icon here on the board, and so we'll populate that with one of our fish tokens. Remember, we're placing these face down like this because we don't know what's on the other side. Now our man can move up here for 1 more stamina, and if he wants to move in here, he can do it for 2 stamina because it's an ocean. However, he can do a move and gather action, collecting this token for free. He does not have to do a move and then gather action for 3 stamina. He can actually just move in here for 2 and automatically pick up the token if he wishes. So this token has a 48 on it. That's an explore icon. That means that we're going to go into this deck and find the 48 card and flip it over. If we did that, we would get a random event, and it could be an event, it could be an item, it could be any number of things that we could find there. But we'll look more at the explore cards in a bit. The token might also have simply shown food, in which case the orange player would keep this to represent the fact that they had 1 meat. The token might also have an enemy on it like this, in which case you have to go into the enemy deck and find this enemy. We can spend 1 more stamina to move back to land here, which leaves us with 3. We can spend our final 3 stamina to go 1, 2, and our final stamina to explore this landmark. We're now down to 0. When we explore this landmark, we go into the exploration deck, and we find card number 13, and then we look at it and read it. There are 4 kinds of exploration cards. You might find an upgrade card like this in the exploration deck. And if you do, this is an upgrade that's placed near the map and every player can access it under certain conditions. Underneath my hands are card texts that will tell you what this does, but I'm not going to reveal them to you. Just know that upgrade is a type of exploration card and you put it face up near the map for everyone to access. Here's our friend the shark. Now, I can reveal this card to you because you saw it earlier. This is a standard enemy card. These match the enemies you will get from the enemy deck as well, but you've discovered them by accident. Now you're going to have to fight it. More on how combat works later. Just know that there can be enemies in the exploration deck. Now here we've got a hidden cellar, and this is a instant card, so this means something immediately happens. So just read the card and find out what that is. Finally, we've got here a item, and item cards are typically quest items that you'll have to keep with you in order to access their secrets at a later date. Note that if you have a quest item and you discover something interesting, you can use that quest item to interact with that thing. But if you do not have the quest item, your friend has it and they aren't with you, then you're shit out of luck. You can't use that quest item to do anything. They're going to have to come and do the exploration with you. You can explore the same location multiple times if there are different routes for you to take. That is to say, if there are multiple cards with the same number in the exploration deck. So we've just learned how to stumble upon a shark. Other ways to encounter enemies might involve monster tokens that spawn during the night. When these monster tokens come out at night, they'll wander around the map, ignoring terrain, moving towards the nearest survivor. If you ever move into a space with one, or one moves into a space with you, it is immediately flipped over to reveal a horrifying monster on the other side that you're going to have to fight. So combat is the big undiscussed mechanic. So let's have a look at combat. So here's a pretty scary enemy. It's a giant python. So the enemy cards are pretty straightforward. Up here you've got a defense value, here you've got an attack value, and down here you've got hit points. Now, here you've got a reward as well. For example, if you kill the giant python, you get 2 meat tokens that you can later cook into food. The way combat works in this game is that you're in a space with an enemy. So here we've got our giant python. He's in a space with our survivor here, so they're going to fight. Now, the survivor will take the 2 d12s and roll them. Now what we're doing here is we're comparing these numbers to the numbers on the card. So what you want is to roll equal to or over the enemy's defense value. 9 is greater than 8, so they take a wound. The red die represents their attack against you. If you roll equal to or over their attack, then they do a damage to you and you take a physical wound. Now remember, physical wounds are really, really bad because they cannot be healed during the recover action. They're the only one that's like this and permanent for the rest of the game. Fortunately, we've rolled a 4 to the Python 6, so we don't take a wound. After that, combat is resolved, and the enemy will retreat. We'll take the value of the red die and compare it to this compass on the board. In this case, it's a 3-4, so the enemy retreats to this space. If our survivor wants to kill the snake, they're going to have to move in there, and combat will immediately begin again. If your friend is within 2 spaces when combat begins, they can offer you support using one of their support cards here. Remember, you don't use these in solo mode because there is no one to support you. You've got 3 options for support. Overpower, which means that if the enemy takes damage, they take 2, which is great. However, if the survivor in combat takes a physical damage, then the supporter also takes 1. Assault allows a reroll of the gray die, and defend allows a reroll of the red die. However, both allow the combatant to give the supporter damage instead of suffering it themselves. So these are questionable. I guess this depends on how cooperatively you're playing. Note that other cards, like weapons and such, will allow you to reroll these dice as well. You can reroll the dice any number of times during combat, but only once per item and once per card. You might find other ways to reroll dice. For example, you can spend any number of wood to reroll the gray die any number of times, and you can spend any number of stone to reroll the red die any number of times as well. You can also spend a poison resource to add a +1 to the result of the gray die, and a machinery resource to add -1 to the result of the red die. But that's only if you're lucky enough to have resources to just throw away like that. Should the giant python take another wound, it will be killed, and the combatant will gain the reward, in this case 2 meat. If a situation arises where an enemy moves into a space with 2 survivors, then the tribal leader determines who goes into combat first. Once the combat against 1 survivor is resolved, the enemy will retreat as normal. You may have a card that allows you to escape from combat. If you do escape from combat, then you simply move out of the space and any unresolved steps in the combat are left unresolved. What this means that if you escape before the enemy retreat step, then your friend will be left and they will have to go into combat. There is also a type of enemy called lethal. For reasons I cannot disclose, I cannot show you an example of a lethal enemy. However, a lethal enemy does not retreat, so once the combat is resolved, resolve it again. Continue resolving the combat until someone's dead. If there are 2 of you in the space with the lethal enemy, then one of you will resolve the combat first, the tribal leader's choice, and then you will move to the player to the left of the first combatant. They will do a combat, and you'll so on around the table until everybody who's involved in the combat has had a turn, and then you'll progress back to the first player, and this will continue until everybody is dead or the enemy is dead. If you have any escape cards, you can use them to escape from this combat, but then your friends will be trapped in the combat with the lethal enemy. So now I'm going to explain the blueprints and the items. If you don't want to see those, look away. Here's an example of a blueprint. This is the blueprint for a basket. What you do is you pay a wood, and when you pay a wood, you go into the item deck here, you find item number 91. You take it, it is now your basket, and it will tell you what you do. For example, this allows you to carry 4 resources on this card. What that means is that when you collect resources in the game, you can put them down in the basket, and the whole thing counts as 1 instead of 4 or however many towards your 10 item limit. Once the basket blueprint is face up next to the map, anyone can craft it at any time on their turn to make a basket for 1 stamina. Remember, you can only have 1 basket at a time. You cannot have any 2 items with the same name. There are just a few last things that you might find on these tiles that I want to explain, and then that's pretty much it for Discover Lands Unknown, because I don't want to spoil anything further. Some tiles might have this symbol here. This is a clean water symbol. When you find that, you can put down a clean water token to indicate that that's there. When you're in this space, you can spend 1 stamina to draw 1 water token, and you can do that any number of times. So you could spend 5 stamina to take 5 water. Here you've got an animal, so when you flip this over, you'll put down an animal token. That's just like any other terrain token, and you can interact with that when you might enter that space by gathering it, and who knows what's under there. Finally, you've got this red flashlight symbol up here, which I wanted to show you because these are quest icons, and these will be referenced by cards from the exploration deck. So you don't need to worry about this until you find a card that says, in the red flashlight space, do a thing or something. So those are worth noting. They're locations, but don't worry about them unless you have something specifically referring to them. So I've deliberately left the night cards and the threat cards a mystery because it tells you everything you need to know about those cards on the cards themselves. So I hope that's given you some insight into how Discover Lands Unknown actually works and what it actually how it plays. If you want to get a better idea of what the game is like, please come back and join Michael and I tomorrow because we'll be playing through the first scenario from this very copy of Discover Lands Unknown here on the channel for you to see. So I hope you'll join us for that, and thanks very much for watching, everyone.